Well, I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business, politics, and today, China. We're really excited to have a dear friend of mine, a CEO, an operating partner, a global business strategist, Marcus Wang, on with us today to have a conversation and dive in deep about the relationship between the United States and China. Marcus, how are you?
I'm great, Ken. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here on Coffee with Ken. It's great to see you again virtually. I saw you recently in London in person, and it can never get enough.
And listen, it's one of those things where it's like we've known each other for a long time, and it's always such a joy to get together in person and actually have a conversation. And that's where this topic really came up, because we had the chance to kind of talk about your personal experiences in China, what you've seen, and what you think about the broader relationship, right? So before we dive in, let people know a little bit about your background. I mean, it's been such an amazing career you had. We've known each other for so long. Talk a little bit about, once you left law school and what you've been up to and what you're doing today.
Absolutely. So I'll speed run it as best I can. I was born and raised in the U.S. I'm of Chinese
Baltimore. In
Baltimore, my hood. And my parents were born and raised in Myanmar, Burma. The news a lot these days. God bless them. My parents went to Catholic schools. English was our first language at home. My dad's never been to China. My mom doesn't speak a word of Chinese. I taught myself Mandarin and Cantonese starting high school. I earned a certificate in Chinese and undergrad at Harvard. I studied a semester of law in Beijing at the Central University of Finance and Economics during law school. I published a law review article on dispute resolution between U.S. and China entities. More on that later.
I translated that. I couldn't even use that.
Nah, you're too tired.
Terrible.
And I also spearheaded Under Armour's entry to the China market over a decade ago when the brand had not yet made its way to consumers there. And I worked primarily in Beijing and Shanghai. I led operations, government relations, regulatory compliance, hiring, training, social media, marketing and events, and the opening of our first retail stores. And since then, I've gone on to found and exit a precision medicine company. I've led economic development for Baltimore County government, and I've served as an operating partner in venture capital, currently a partner in a venture focusing on global market expansion, particularly for VC PE-backed portfolio companies, including both inbound and outbound opportunities with China, the U.S., and the U.K., where I'm currently based.
That's amazing. So let's go back in time to that moment when you teamed up with the Under Armour team. I vividly remember that. I remember when you had published that law review article, and then you said, I'm going to go to China and help Under Armour expand. What was that experience like for you? What were the perceptions that you had going in, and what were you surprised by?
First, it was a magical opportunity. I remember Kevin Plank telling me when the first stores opened in China, he said, congratulations. No one else can say they ever did it. And you did it with us. And I owe him a lot, and I owe Under Armour a lot. I think it was just one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. And when I went to China, I'd gone there as someone who admired and respected Chinese culture, but still someone who had spent most of my life, all of my life in America. And going there, I learned a lot about different things. And we can talk about daily life. We can talk about business. There are a lot of high-level differences. I mean, on a basic level, there's much more, I think, that unites us and divides us. But there are differences between U.S. and China in the way we do business. Little things like, in America, Ken, right, we have the sense that a real man is macho. We're loud, we're assertive. You go in for a handshake, and you look them dead in the eye, you give them a firm grip. When you do that in China, they're going to see you as a bit loud, uncouth, and civilized. In China, a real man shows restraint and humility. You're a gentleman. But to an American eye, it seems a bit weak, soft, or submissive. In America, we like our bravado, we like bombast. In the startup world, we like to fake it till you make it. This is the greatest thing ever. This is huge, it's revolutionary. And in China, the Chinese are very much like the British, actually, I've discovered. They like to downplay and understate things. The Chinese people, you don't hear Chinese say, this is great, this is amazing. They'll just say, 这是不错吧? Not bad. To an American, it sounds like a lack of self-confidence, but to Chinese, it's about restraint and humility. So that's one, it was one area that I thought when I had to code switch a lot when I was doing business in China. And when I talked to the home team in America versus folks in China.
That's amazing. But did you go there thinking that the government was going to be difficult to work with? Did you have preconceived notions of your time in the United States and kind of perceptions maybe Americans have about China being competitive, being a threat, being difficult to work for, that the government is going to be over your shoulder and prevent you from, free enterprise? Did you have some of these kind of notions going in where you surprised by what it was like to ramp up there? Yeah,
absolutely. You're absolutely right. Because, when I went in, and I say I went in as a supporter and a fan, and I love China. But still, I'm from America, and I had these preconceived notions that they're going to be repressive, they're going to be this, they're going to be that, they're not going to respect the rule of law. And I was very pleasantly surprised to discover that even though there are differences, ultimately all those fears were completely unfounded.
Hmm.
And I was very pleasantly surprised. And I was just telling you, I went with some friends to a church in China. And I told people, aren't you afraid? You wear the cross around your neck. Some people are Muslims, and they're open about their faith and they're out there singing and doing it. I said, aren't you afraid you're on a list somewhere or something? They said, what are you talking about? Are you outside your mind right now? This is fine. I just thought that there would be a lot more repression or suppression. There wasn't. There's absolutely, people were very free to criticize the government, to speak freely, to talk freely and express their thoughts. And that was something that really blew my mind. But yeah.
So on that thread, let's just take a step back. I'd love to kind of get your perception of the broader U.S.-China relationship today. Obviously, here in America, we just had Liberation Day, and now China countered with reciprocal tariffs. The stakes seem to be escalating. The tension seems to be rising on the economic front. What's your take on that? I mean, where do you think the relationship stands? Where do you think it's headed? Clearly, even from a supply chain perspective, no matter what, U.S. companies still rely on China for product, for supply chain, and so on. So,
well, I'll say one thing. There's a lot of ink spilled and a lot of people talking about it. I think one of the things is that we don't realize is China has a lot more leverage now, because the tariffs are not targeted at China alone. They're on the world. Before, China had a lot less room to negotiate with Walmarts, with Targets, and everyone else, because you could always move to Vietnam or somewhere else. Now the tariffs are everywhere. They're universal. They're even on, I've read, uninhabited islands have gotten tariffs slapped on them. Islands that have only U.S. troops on them. So in that sense, China is going to be okay. But I think China is also willing to take more pain. Because in the short term, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pain inflicted on the American consumer. Long term, depending on how the government handles it, the pain could continue or be mitigated. We're going to see what happens. We don't know. But I think that it's about the message it sends to the world. It's about a message that, okay, we're going to put America first, which frankly, the American government should put the interests of the American people first. I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with bringing back, with onshoring, with bringing back jobs, protecting the American middle class, all of that. Is this the right way in which to do it? I think time will tell. But right now, I think the other countries in the world are going to view us with a bit more skepticism.
So this kind of strategy of kind of imposing more tariffs, kind of, withdrawing American presence and even kind of what's happening with NATO and so on, is this just creating a larger opportunity for China to just grow further on the global stage and kind of further deepen relations at a time where it seems like the U.S. might be pulling back more geopolitically?
100%. What a great point. Because, for example, it was announced the other day that China, Japan, and South Korea, 3 countries that don't really love each other all that much, are going to be presenting a unified response to the U.S. tariffs. It takes a lot to get those 3 in the same room and on the same page. And we've done it. There's an apocryphal quote attributed to a minister or a leader in Africa, maybe Kenya. And it said, when the U.S. comes, they give us a lecture. When China comes, they give us a hospital. So this is very much the moment where China and their Belt Road Initiative and all the efforts of outreach they're making around the world are going to have more resonance if America pulls back. As we pull back our aid and China increases its aid, as China forgives loans and we impose austerity conditions on our loans, it's going to start alienating a lot of the countries in the world that used to be American allies.
So as we're experiencing this resurgence in manufacturing in the United States, you can't help but realize that now in retrospect, we had outsourced so much manufacturing over the last 35 years to China, to other countries. What is this moment going to be like in the United States? What challenges do you see now on the manufacturing front? Are we well positioned in the U.S. to kind of grow a manufacturing industrial base? Or are we going to have challenges because of growing tension with China and because we've kind of outsourced so much for so long?
You're right. We're going to have a lot of challenges in the short term. How we deal with those challenges in the short term is going to determine our path in the long term. But going back to outsourcing has been basically, right, a 4-letter word in America.
Yeah.
And in fact, I can't disagree. I've personally witnessed in my personal life and as a government official and everything else, I personally witnessed how outsourcing has hollowed out American communities. It destroyed families and neighborhoods, eliminated jobs, and made it harder, if not impossible, to get an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. But here's the thing. None of that is China's fault, right? People blame China for it all the time, but capital has no nationality. It just chases returns. The Chinese didn't point a gun at American heads and demand that they ship factories over to Shenzhen. The U.S. leaders chose to trade its factories for stock buybacks. In the last 25 years, we've lost 5 million U.S. manufacturing jobs. Well, profits and productivity soared, but none of those gains went to the workers or communities. They went to the top. Also, by the way, outsourcing to China is now old news because it's all about Vietnam. Apple suppliers like Foxconn make its AirPods and MacBooks in Vietnam, not China. Hasbro makes all the toys in Vietnam, not China, because the wages in Vietnam are less than half of the wages in China. And it's not even a living wage. It's a race to the bottom. And the real news is that automation is taking everyone's jobs. And the issue is to ensure, how do we ensure that the negative externalities of automation, as well as outsourcing, lead to efficiency, but lead to a better life rather than sacrifice? And so I think the real message people ought to get is that outsourcing has been bad in many ways, but it's not China's fault. It's not China's fault that American CEOs sacrificed jobs for quarterly earnings and stock buybacks. They should have invested those profits in American communities. It's not China's fault that American policymakers put profits over American people. And it's not China's fault that our politicians have been pitting workers against each other across borders instead of uniting for fair wages. So blaming China isn't going to bring back jobs or prosperity of the American dream. We have to focus on domestic renewal, domestic investment. We have to invest in education. We have to invest in infrastructure. And we have to incentivize people to ensure that America is both a good steward of American interests at home and a responsible global citizen abroad.
So one of the other ancillary impacts of this outsourcing for so many decades, in my opinion, is not just about how it hollowed out the American manufacturing base, but the acceleration we gave China in training a workforce for manufacturing. So what has kind of been the ancillary, I guess, benefit to China because of this outsourcing? Is the workforce more readily prepared for automation, for innovation? I mean, you're seeing massive technological advancements in China, from AI to robotics and so on. I mean, have we just inevitably kind of just created a better, stronger workforce for future technological needs in China versus the United States because of these policies?
I don't think it's a question of America gave away the store or America enabled China. China, I think, would have gotten there regardless, one way or the other. So there's this sentiment, often in American media, the Chinese are copycats, right? They just copy. They can't innovate. They copy. And of course, now China's coming out with innovations every single day. They have the most patents filed in the world. They have AI innovations. They've built space stations. EVs, my goodness, right? The 5-minute charging, the whole thing. And there's a lack of understanding of the Chinese culture. So when we've seen how Chinese writing looks like, right? The ideograms. And the way they learn is a process called miaohu. You copy. First, you trace. You copy it, get it right. Then they take away the tracing. You have to write it within squares. Then they take away the squares and you write it freehand. And then when you've mastered the basics, you've mastered the essentials, then you create your own. So it's all about training the basics. So for the Chinese, they say, well, yeah, let's start at the bottom of the supply chain. Let's learn every bit of how to manufacture, how to assemble, all the gut work. We'll learn it. And once we've mastered that, we move on to the next step and the next step. And then once we've mastered all the basics and it's muscle memory, now we can start innovating. And now we've reached the point in the generation in China where they can truly innovate based on the learnings they've accumulated over the past.
So talk a little bit about the time horizon of decision making. I think you and I spent some time in the UK talking about this, right? I think sometimes in the United States, we're not thinking as long-term as maybe China is. Talk about just the mentality, the approach, whether it's from business or from the government.
Absolutely. I think in America, things are short-term, right? CEOs look at things in terms of fiscal quarters. Politicians look at things in terms of 2-year election cycles. Chinese CEOs look in terms of decades, and Chinese leadership looks in terms of generation. Because America is a 250-year-old country, and China is a 5,000-year-old country. Inevitably, there are going to be differences in how we view the time horizon. So one example is the loans, the Belt Road Initiative. China's been extending infrastructure loans all around the world. And there's been a lot of consternation in the Western press warning people who said, well, these loans are onerous. They represent a significant portion or exceed your GDP. If you default these loans, it's a debt trap. And China can come in and they can seize your ports, and they can seize your hospitals and highways and everything. You'll be enthralled to them forever. And there was that threat. Well, you know what happened? In the last few years, there have been defaults. China's forgiven 20 free African loans. They've seized nothing. The IMF forgave zero. And China's saying, okay, you know what? We'll let it be. In Sudan, we'll forgive this loan. Here, we'll forgive this loan. In Namibia, everywhere. And it's not out of altruism, because no government can function that way. It's about long-term thinking. Because you take that hospital away, you take that port away, you just create an enemy for life. But by building strong and stable infrastructure and making these countries safer, the oil flows, the minerals flow. There's a market for trading. They're helping countries in Africa become self-sufficient, strong, and innovative on their own, which means they can now become true trading partners and global partners for the next decade, for the next century. And that's how they're viewing it.
So how do you view the American-China relationship evolving over the next 5, 10, 50 years? Because it seems like the conversation is continuously grounded in threat, in military domination, in kind of regional kind of conflict on the horizon. How do you see this playing out? I mean,
I hope that we have cool heads and clear eyes, and we can look at China and look at what works, what doesn't work, what we can absorb and learn for ourselves in America. For example, in America, we've got a lot of issues around healthcare. This might not come as a great surprise, but a lot of Americans aren't happy with their healthcare. Yeah. Well, the same has been true in China. So in China, we talked about this earlier, the fact that China, we have this issue, we think of China as a scary, spooky place where if you speak out, they're going to disappear, right? They're going to be swooping off the street with masks and white uniforms, reading your rights and just take you away to some jail. And, that's not necessarily the case. So in 2018, there's a movie called Dying to Survive. And Dying to Survive is a movie about Chinese people who can't afford essential medicines for cancer. People who couldn't afford to get medicine they need because it's too expensive. And so, which, by the way, I think sounds very familiar to American audiences. It's a merciless indictment of China's healthcare system. And the patient ended up smuggling generic drugs from India so he could save himself and others. And this was based, by the way, on a true story of what happened in China. It doesn't paint China in the best light, right? You'd expect that the director would be disappeared, the movie would be censored, it'd be banned, and no one ever touched the subject again. Well, the opposite happened. What actually happened was the movie resonated so strongly with audiences who had similar struggles, it became a box office sensation. People loved it, people talked about it, and the premier of China himself cited the movie repeatedly in public speeches to push for price cuts for medication. And in the end, popular consent, popular demand, the response to that film helped catalyze what they call the Jicai program in China. And that's a bulk buying program. The Chinese government is using its purchasing power to buy drugs for the people. It's made deals with pharma companies. We'll guarantee through offtake agreements, we'll purchase your drugs as long as it meets quality standards. Your profit margins will go way down. You'll make it up on volume because we have 2 billion Chinese people. And I was looking at the reports. Prices have dropped 90% on average. Insulin, a year's supply of insulin used to cost $730 American dollars a year per patient. Now it's 70. And over 10 million diabetic patients can now get access. Hip knee replacement used to cost over $5,000. Now it's $1,000. A box of hepatitis C medication used to cost almost $9,000. Now it's about $400. Blood thinners are $20 US dollars a pill. Now it's on average 90 cents a pill. So they're using the power of the government to drive better outcomes for the people. And that's very much in line with Chinese governance, right? In America, the right to rule is derived from the consent of the governed. People vote for you and you get the leader you deserve. In China, it's not that way. In China, the leaders have never been divinely appointed, nor have they been deriving their power from the consent of the people. It's about the outcomes they deliver to the people. And if they deliver outcomes, then they have the so-called blessing of heaven, the Qianmin. And heaven blesses them, they can be the leader. And the minute they stop delivering outcomes, there are famines, there are wars, things aren't going well, then that's a tacit signal from the heavens that it's time to get a new government. So the ruling party has always understood that for thousands of years. And they understand that today. They need to drive outcomes, better outcomes for their people in order for them to legitimize their rule. And I would love to see some of that come into America. I would love to see the U.S. use its massive power, purchasing power, to lower drugs to people, to deliver better outcomes for all the people, to improve access to healthcare, for example, and healthcare equity for the people of America.
So we're putting your advisory hat on now. You talk to lots of companies, lots of entrepreneurs. You did this for Under Armour. How often are you advising folks on doing business in China, creating a China growth strategy? What is your advice to them? Well, what's the kind of go forward, taking into account tariffs, geopolitical environment, et cetera?
We're doing a lot. It really depends on the company in question, the sector in question, and what they're looking for in terms of expansion. It could be a Chinese company that wants to expand to the US or UK. It could be a US UK company that feels like there's opportunity for them in the Chinese market. And the good thing is the Chinese market has gotten so much more open and so much more predictable and in line with international norms just in the last 5 years alone. Doing business now in China is much easier than it used to be when I was first there in 2010. Back then, so I think we talked earlier about, I did research on dispute resolution in China. Now, that was a pretty big deal because back then, if you had a contract with China, most likely that contract would have been found invalid. And even if it were found valid, you probably couldn't sue in a court of law. You didn't have standing. Even if you could sue, you probably wouldn't win. And even if you did win, they probably wouldn't enforce a judgment in your favor. So you had to look at international arbitration. You had to look at other mechanisms trying to get justice. It's very different. The fast forward to today, completely different. China's rule of law has made enormous strides. It's in line with international norms. You take that same contract today, it'll be held valid. You want to sue, you sue in the Chinese court, and you'll probably win, and you can collect. Knockoff products used to come out of China like a flood. Now they've slowed to a trickle or disappeared. Just 2 years ago, foreign plaintiffs won 80% of all patent IP cases filed in China. 80%. Now these judgments were then enforced. Cases used to take over 2 years to go through the legal system there. Now the average is 6 months. So it's become a situation where it's a much friendlier business environment. They used to force you to do joint ventures. You have to surrender your tech, you have to do all these different things if you want to do business there. Now in so many even previously considered sensitive areas like biotech, you can have a wholly owned foreign company and open that in Chinese shores. As long as you comply with the law, you're good to go. So there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of opportunity to be had in the Chinese markets in both ways.
So I want to bring it back domestic, right? Because you had this amazing experience with Under Armour expanding and growing in China, but you also started a US-based company. You had an exit, and then you served in economic development roles in Baltimore here in Maryland. So bring it back to the US. Like, what did you see as a kind of US entrepreneur creating a company, selling it, and what were the kind of challenges / opportunities you saw and learned during your time in public service for how and what should we be doing domestically as business leaders, as policy leaders, to further kind of create opportunities for innovation and success and growth?
I think we have to broaden our time horizons. We have to remember, I would tell this all the time to people in government. And sometimes I'd be answered with a light of awakening in their eyes. And sometimes I would get this look of absolute stupefaction. What are you talking about? Because what I would tell them is, we're public servants. We're here to serve the people. We have to serve the people of America. Everything you enjoy about where you live right now, whether it's Virginia or Maryland, New York, it's the end product of the work that was done by people who came before us. People whose names we don't know, we wouldn't recognize. They're not famous, they're unsung, but their work lives on. That sort of self-sacrificing spirit, prioritizing the welfare of the collective over merely the welfare of the individual, that's what made America great. That's what made America emerge from the wilderness centuries ago to become one of the most dynamic, innovative, and powerful nations in the world. I think most people would agree that we may have lost our way a little bit, but we no longer do that. We have to rediscover that spirit. We have to rediscover the spirit of community. We have to work together, and we have to incentivize innovation. We have to work, as I was saying earlier about the Chinese bulk buying program, we have to marshal the great forces we have in government, not for the betterment of just a few, but for the betterment of all the people in America. I think it's absolutely essential. And it's critical for us to remember that as great as a country may be, there's still a lot we can learn from other people. We can learn from Europe. We can learn from the UK, very much from the UK. And we can absolutely learn from China and their success.
That's amazing. Marcus, I'm so glad we finally made this happen. It was so great seeing you in the UK recently. I appreciate all your insights and then thoughts on this topic. I mean, and congrats on everything you've been working on to date.
Ken, man, I'm looking up to you. I admire everything you've done, your beautiful family, your career, the whole thing. You're an absolute mensch, your success, and it's lovely just having a chance to catch up. Yeah, I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
listen. Well, look, I appreciate you joining. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We really wanted to dive into this topic and hear kind of, broader perspective that I benefited hearing from when I was last with Marcus. So looking forward to our next conversation. Everybody tuning in is coffeewithken.com. Don't forget to subscribe and continue to follow us on YouTube and on social media and elsewhere. Take care. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you, Ken.